Hey my friend, Jonah here, and welcome to Lions Mane Media. Now for this week's video, I wanted to try out something a bit different, so we'll see how that turns out. Before I had started this channel, I prepared a list of topics to kind of give me ideas on videos to create, and I realized I had ended up doing a video on all but one. Now, there are still topics to cover, of course, but this is a very interesting one, at least to me. And after a bit of feedback, I think I know the best way to set it up. So, without further ado, I have a story to tell you. Once, there were two friends who lived in a little village in a kingdom far away. They were like brothers, having grown up together, dreaming of going on adventures to faraway places. But one day, one of them had to leave their little village, for a distant relative had gotten sick. Although it was hard for them, that day the friends made a promise to one another, that on an appointed day, 5 years in the future, they would leave their homes to head out and seek their fortunes. And so the friends were parted, with only the hope that their journeys would reunite them one day. The years passed, and the day they had appointed had finally arrived. The boy who had stayed in the village was now a man, and he was ready to fulfill his promise, at least until he was met with a deluge from a rainstorm at the door. Realizing how harsh the road would be, he decided that the trip should be postponed for a day. But that days became a week as the rains continued. Finally, the sun came out, and he was ready once again, but now the road was blocked by debris from the storm. None of the toughs from the village should get out, and rather than climb over the trunks and rocks, he helped his fellow villagers clear their trade route for the next week. With that task finally completed, he began once again to set out down the road. Yet this time, he was met with a blockade. The soldiers there told him that the king and his family had gone missing at sea, and the nobles left in charge were now demanding that all travel and trade be cleared with them, with a touch of any goods and profits, of course. Disheartened, he returned to his little village, for how could he travel on the roads as freely as he wanted, as long as there were blockades in place? So he stayed. 2 years passed, and his hunger for adventure having dulled, he began to accept his comfortable routine in the village. For there was always plenty to do there. There were animals to feed, fences to mend, tarts to load, and even the little girls were starting to take notice of him. But one day, the sound of a horn was heard in the village. He went to find out what was the commotion, and found a troop of knights under the standard of the royal family. And the one who had blown the horn was none other than his old friend. Upon seeing him, his friend dismounted his horse and ran to greet him. "Come, I have so many things to tell you," his friend said, as he led him to some rocks for them both to sit on. His friend related that the king's daughter had been found and made queen, and that she ended up passing judgment on the nobles for how they treated the people. Thus, the blockades and grievous taxes were over. Yet, the man who had stayed wondered what role his friend had played in all these events. His friend answered, "Well, on the day we appointed, there was a massive rainstorm, but in keeping my promise to you, I bundled up tight in my cloak, lit my lantern, and set out through the forest trails, taking shelter under those trees and even in caves. After a week, the sun came out, and I was able to reach the port before the end of the week, as the daylight made it easier to climb over the rocks and the fallen trees. And the ocean, the sight of it took my breath away. But then, as I entered the port, I learned of what the nobles had been doing. I realized that there was probably little chance of me getting to travel on any of the ships at port anytime soon. So I set out along the coastline, hoping that I might find some other way out of our kingdom. A few days had passed when I found a woman who had washed up on the shore. I started a fire and shared some of my provisions with her. She asked about who I was, what realm she was in, and what the state of it was. So I told her all she had asked, and when I told her about the nobles and what they were doing, a stern, yet serene look came over her. It was then that she asked me to help her, for she had a family friend not far away, who could provide her shelter, and maybe even find me a way out of the kingdom. Thus, I served as her guide, and we moved quickly that night. We did not stop at all. We arrived at her destination by dawn, and it was then that I found out her true identity. She was the princess, and thus the teen's rightful heir. I swore my service and allegiance to her on the spot. But the nobles were treacherous, and would not let go of the power they had seized without a fight. So for the past 2 years, we have gathered our forces and led a revolution against them, and now we are finally victorious. And that is where we will leave off the tale of these two friends, at least for now. Yet there is still the moral of this story, which is as follows. Those who wait for the world to change will never change the world. It's probably been said before by others, and probably even better, but it's still true today, and maybe even all the more apparent. Because how often do we wait for everything to be just right, or we even hear, at least we hear about everything needing to be just right before someone's made to move. They have to have the perfect plan into place, or they're waiting for everything to fall into order, like the perfect person, the perfect thing, the perfect timing. Everything just has to be right. It's like they're waiting for the stars to align. And oftentimes, there are more things in line than we might realize. It only takes the action to begin to see it. But then, some people just wait for perfect timing and never make a move at all. Also, we may look at the circumstances and wonder what's the point of even doing anything with the world being like it is. But therein is the other side of it. Isn't the world being like it is one of the reasons to actually do something about it? It's a different perspective entirely. And it might even be something that we have to change, because then how do we change the world without first being willing to change ourselves? And again, we might be doing stuff, but sometimes the very fact is that changing the world begins with changing us. It's like changing your family begins with changing yourself. Changing your community begins with changing your family. Changing your nation begins with changing your community. It's like always a step lower in the change to affect the outer, because then we often don't have much influence except of ourselves to begin with. So we just start with ourselves. And sometimes we are already doing things that change the world. We just may not see all the ripple effects, because sometimes they're even generational and far down the road. So, but again, the thing is kind of, what are we doing? And are we kind of seeking to be that change we want to see, if that makes sense? But anyway, I'll probably quit rambling for now, since this is my perspective. But what do you think? Feel free to let me know in the comments below and share any other feedback you may have. And if you liked today's video, please like and subscribe to support the growth of this channel. And I'll talk to you later, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.